Hello and welcome to the Functionally Enlightened podcast with Dr. Sharon Sarita. We interview well-respected medical and functional practitioners, as well as patients who have overcome disabling chronic conditions, such as dysautonomia, and reclaimed their health. These enlightened guests provide helpful tips on managing chronic pain and illnesses, using a combination of traditional and whole-body healing modalities. If you're interested in natural healing and quality of life improvement, you're in the right place. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to Functionally Enlightened podcast. We're here today with Jennifer Woodward, who is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner like me. She's also a board-certified functional wellness coach, and she holds a Master of Science in Integrative Nutrition. She's specializing now in guiding perimenopausal women through hormonal transitions using a personalized approach, especially emphasizing the use of functional lab testing. Her signature program offers a step-by-step approach to addressing hormonal imbalances, also gut health, which we touch on quite frequently, thyroid function, and more. She guides women, empowering them to regain energy, mood stability, and metabolic health. Also, very new to the press, she's the author of Easy Perimenopause, which is the essential guide to modern midlife. Highly recommend that. It's a great read, very distilled down so we can implement all of the practical tips she shares. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that in just a moment. Welcome, Jennifer. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us here.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time.
Of course, of course. So in our show, we like to talk to our practitioners and get to the bottom of what brought them to the functional health space. What personal health challenges, if any, led you to specialize specifically for you in functional nutrition with a focus on perimenopause?
Absolutely. So how I got into functional nutrition to begin with is I have 4 children. When my third was born, he had skin issues that were just overwhelming to us. We had no idea what to do. We took him from doctor to doctor to doctor, and he would go outside and he'd get in the pool, he'd play in the bathtub, and his skin would just open up and he'd have this weeping eczema. And we thought, gosh, what is this? And so we tried the steroid route. We, tried the medication route. And then one day someone introduced us to a food sensitivity test. And when we ran that on my little guy, we found out that he was highly sensitive to milk products and also chlorine. And so being in the bathtub and in the pool were really, really hard on his little body. Once we removed those two things, his skin cleared right up, and we were believers in these, weird lab tests that we had to pay for out of pocket because they really helped our family. And so that was the catalyst that got me to really start on the FDN tract. But then how I got into perimenopause is I was going through it myself. I didn't realize that, decades of over dieting and over stressing and over exercising and skimping on sleep had completely tanked my hormones. And so same story with me. I went from doctor to doctor to doctor asking for help. Why am I not sleeping? Why am I gaining weight? Why is my hair falling out? And why is my digestion a mess? And no doctor could tell me what was wrong with me. I got a prescription for birth control. I got a prescription for Prozac, and I was not any better. And so really diving into functional nutrition, running all the functional labs on myself, I realized, goodness, I've put myself into early perimenopause at age 35. And so working backward, having the labs as data to start fixing, my hormones and my gut dysfunction, food sensitivities, thyroid issues, really helped me feel so much better in perimenopause. It's been 7 years now, and I feel better than ever. And so it's really my mission to help empower and guide other women who are going through this confusing time of perimenopause to feel not just, better, but the best they felt in a really long time.
Yes, and I share a similar story in that I remember receiving the prescriptions for anti-anxiety medications and the birth control. In essence, for me, I had mast cell stabilization issues, and their suggestion was, oh, let's eliminate the period because we know those estrogen fluctuations can trigger these mast cells. And I thought about it, and I actually tried maybe 3 days before I was really like, is this really going to solve the problem? Yeah. So, and I know that's more specific in terms of a specific disorder, but let's go back into with the functional lab testing that you use and how that differs from the conventional labs that we see when we go into our gynecologist or even primary care.
Yeah, I do love this. And, it's not to discount primary care physicians and the lab work that they run, because we can find some interesting information from that, particularly with the thyroid. And sometimes, with even autoimmunity, if we're looking at the thyroid itself. But it's very hard to diagnose perimenopause
Mhm.
specifically. It's really hard to diagnose a lot of hormone issues. But for women, perimenopause is undiagnosable. Therefore, it's really unfixable, because you can't just give a pill, pharmaceutical, to pull back all of these symptoms. And so, while traditional lab work, especially, estradiol and progesterone and maybe even cortisol, can be helpful for determining whether or not a woman's getting close to menopause, it's not going to have the same long-reaching effects as functional lab work. I use a lot of the Dutch test in my practice. You probably do too, that, breaks down not only estrogen and all of the estrogens, not just estradiol, but also estrone and estriol. It's looking at testosterone and its metabolites, progesterone and its metabolites, and cortisol, like a daily free cortisol pattern and cortisol curve. And all those, are very important to really suss out for a woman who's not sleeping well, who's having belly fat issues, who is having mood swings that are, almost divorce worthy. We have to look at all of those hormones and, again, their metabolites too, and their relationship to one another. And so that test is really the backbone of my practice with perimenopausal women. And so literally right before we got on this podcast, I was just meeting with a client who said, I'm not happy about my results, but I'm thankful that they explain the symptoms that I've been having. And for her, it was just really terrible mood swings where she said she said she wanted to hit her husband across the face with her coffee cup. For no reason, no reason that she could discern. And she just isn't sleeping well at night. And so, looking at the Dutch and seeing, gosh, estrogen's really, really high, progesterone's really, really low. We're able to go in and kind of course correct there and provide some lifestyle interventions to help her sleep better and kind of stabilize her mood. So that Dutch test particularly, I find outweighs the benefits of traditional blood testing, because it gives us a more comprehensive picture. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, with the metabolites and getting an idea. And it has a lot of other parameters in there too, in terms of neurotransmitters and gut function. So it's not just the hormones that you would get in a blood serum. It's so much more.
Absolutely. And especially for some of those mood symptoms, if I see a client that the organic acids are low in dopamine, right? They're really low in like their vitamin B6. I know we're going to have some mood issues. And again, we can go in and start correcting those with lifestyle, maybe some supplements, definitely nutrition. So it just tends to be a really good bang for your buck, because like you said, there are so many indicators on the Dutch that give us a picture of what's truly going on physically and sometimes even emotionally.
hmm So let's go back to the basics now. When we're talking about misconceptions that we encounter day to day, what are some of the most common ones that you see in perimenopause, or maybe even that your clients come to you with?
Absolutely. I love this question. The number one thing I hear from clients is, my doctor said my lab work is normal. And that kind of goes back to your previous question where, doctors will run like maybe a CMP or a CBC, or they're looking at just TSH on someone's thyroid labs. And they're like, yeah, everything looks fine. You're within standard ranges. There's nothing wrong with you. And, the woman's like, oh my gosh, I haven't slept in 3 weeks. My belly fat's hanging out over my yoga pants. My mood is terrible. I just don't know what's going on. I'm not fine, right? So it can just be a very confusing time for women who hear from their doctors that their lab work is normal. And that's a common misconception. If a woman, is in her late 30s, early 40s, late 40s, and hears that from her doctor, but her symptoms are telling her differently, she's probably struggling with some perimenopausal symptoms, right?
Mhm.
The other thing I hear a lot, like common misconceptions from women, are that these symptoms are normal, because they're common, but they're not normal. When we have really terrible PMS or heavy clotty periods, or these mood swings that just really throw you off, consistent hot flashes, weight gain, right? Those don't necessarily have to be normal for perimenopause. In my book, I kind of talk about the premise of the overs, where basically this compounded stress for many reasons in our 20s and 30s have led to such a dysregulation of hormones in our 40s that our body really kind of starts to go a little bit haywire. So all those symptoms aren't necessarily normal. Right? Our bodies don't have to experience them. And that's a common misconception from women too, is perimenopause is going to be terrible. Menopause is going to be worse. It doesn't have to be that way.
So you were talking about those common misconceptions, and I actually am working with a few clients right now. I primarily work with people that are implant injured, but they happen to be in the perimenopausal phase of life.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
they're having these additional things. We focus a little bit on hormones, not so much, and maybe you can shed some light on some of the things that they're experiencing. For instance, like you said, the cycles are becoming a little more irregular. There's more hot flashes, sleep disruption. What are some of the other things? I think those are the primary complaints. So how would you approach looking and evaluating these type of symptoms?
Sure. So let me clarify, when you're working with your clients, like breast implants.
All kinds of implants, actually.
Oh,
So it
okay.
can be hernia mesh implants. But
Mhm.
this particular demographic, we're going to focus on these perimenopausal women, and they are not even fully aware. They have not been diagnosed as being perimenopausal, so they're just transitioning now.
Right. Yeah, yep, completely understand. So yeah, the symptoms, they feel like they come out of nowhere because generally, these women have been bebopping along, having a good time, getting to dial in their nutrition, feeling like they're eating pretty good, doing their exercise, kind of on top of the world, being really productive. And then all of a sudden, these symptoms just come out of nowhere and they feel terrible. So you brought up a couple of the top ones, hot flashes and, period issues, and sleep disturbances, but other ones we'll see are definitely mood's a big one. Mood's a big player. A lot of like formerly very even keel women start to get a lot of like rage during perimenopause. We call it the F it's time. They're like, I just can't do it anymore. That's a big one is mood. Also body composition changes. So a lot
Mhm.
of women, as estrogen levels first really peak and then start declining, will start to gather a lot more belly fat. And it could be visceral fat, which is a little bit, more toxic, right? Than just like, fat that's right, subcutaneous fat right under the surface of the skin. But regardless, it's not fun to look at or feel, when you're like a 40-year-old woman who's always enjoyed like a pretty, normal body, right? So those body composition changes are really frustrating for women. Skin elasticity changes is a huge one. I have a lot of women who say like their hands start looking older, their neck and their face start looking older, and
Mhm.
that's confusing for them too. One interesting symptom is itchiness. A lot of women in perimenopause will start to experience like itchiness in the inner ear or skin itchiness that they just don't understand why it's happening. There's a hormonal component there. So those are some of the, more common and maybe less common symptoms of perimenopause. And I think your question too was, how would you go about starting to, balance out those symptoms, right? Yeah. So I know your audience hears all the time about the dress protocol and what we do as functional practitioners working on nutrition, so diet and rest and exercise and stress management. And I tell my clients supplements really based off of only your lab work and sometimes your symptoms.
Mhm.
So if I had to synopsize all those in one word, with diet, it would be protein, right? With rest, it would be sunlight. That's my huge one. I'd love to talk more about that.
Yeah.
With exercise, it would be steps. Stop all your heavy workouts, stop CrossFit, stop Orange Theory, stop marathon training. Like it's really hard for a woman in perimenopause to see benefits from that. So just outside, walking 10,000 steps a day is helpful. With stress management, I would say Epsom salt baths, like my one big hack for my women. There's a lot more, but that's a good one to start with. And then with supplements, again, it would just be whatever is needed on, your Dutch test, your thyroid labs, your GI map, whatever we see your body's telling us, we can go in and course correct if need be with first food-based supplements, and then maybe pills and powders if need be.
Okay, so let's go with that protein component. I do work with people who they're eliminating a lot of the, we'll say, plant matter because they're dealing with oxalate overload or histamine
Mhm.
intolerances. And so they're trying to figure out how to manage the protein without triggering that histamine overload. So how would you guide people that are probably on a limited diet already?
I work a lot with that client population too, and it can be really frustrating. And probably when your clients come to you that maybe they're already aware, of some of those terms and kind of what they mean, but a lot of women don't understand that, their red itchy eyes, their, skin itchiness, their gut issues have to do with some histamine intolerance. So one of the things I really like to do with my private clients is run a food sensitivity test just to make sure, just to see. And that not only shows us us particular foods that people are sensitive to, specifically the proteins in those foods. But then also, are they sensitive to sulfites or sulfates, or any of these other kind of components that are, in aged food. So I would tell my clients, you're eating more protein, but you have to cook it fresh. Unfortunately, you can't be eating 3-day-old or hamburger from the refrigerator, or your eyes are going to be itchy the rest of the day. So kind of just like our ancestors did, try to eat as fresh as possible. Animal proteins do tend to be as they're better for assimilation. Like our bodies just handle them better. If we're talking about a histamine intolerance, then dairy products are going to be really hard on the body. And especially if there is, the high estrogen that can generally accompany perimenopause, you got to be really careful about histamines, because higher estrogen makes it harder for our bodies to degrade that histamine, and can trigger a lot of that, mast cell response.
Right. And that goes back to how our conventional practices would suggest stopping the period altogether, but that's not necessarily the best route.
Right.
And the only consideration with that are those that have very heavy blood flow and they are iron deficient anemia, but there's other ways to approach it. So when you have a client who might be susceptible to this type of situation, how would you approach that?
I love this question because if I see that very regularly, especially in perimenopause, periods start to get very heavy. They start to get more clotty, if that's a word, more clots than women had when they were younger. The blood flow can increase from, 4 to 5 days to 10 to 14 days. So the first thing that I'm doing is running the Dutch test to look at estrogen levels, look at, detoxification of that estrogen. Which pathway are we getting rid of that estrogen, or are we getting rid of that estrogen, or is it just like building up in the system? What does progesterone levels look like? So those two things for a very heavy period are something that conventional practitioners don't necessarily look at. Sometimes, to be fair, I will hear of doctors like throwing a progesterone pill at people with heavy bleeds, right? Which is a good first step for pharmaceutical intervention, but it's not usually just low progesterone. It's generally too much estrogen plus low progesterone. So timing the cycle right, running the Dutch, and then, using food particularly to pull down that excess estrogen, and then using food and maybe some supplementation, maybe some hormone replacement therapy to shore up that progesterone levels will generally even out that heavy bleeding within 1 to 3 months. I've seen it time and time and time again, because we don't want to take away the period before, nature or God have, determined that it would stop naturally. It's just not great for the body. But we can certainly do some palliative care to pull back on the uncomfortableness, of having a super heavy, super long period.
Okay. And on the converse, if someone's having a very light period, or maybe they're not even cycling every month, how would you approach that scenario?
Right. I get that a lot too, really scanty period. And generally that's that client population too, of women who are just overachievers. They've pushed themselves too hard. They're doing lots of exercise. They've dieted for a very long time. I can spot that pattern on the Dutch test almost every single time, because I'm going to see completely depleted hormones. So if you don't have a period, or your period's very scanty, very light, or doesn't come very often, number one, that can be a hallmark of perimenopause. As your hormones start declining, that tends to happen. But if it's happening earlier than you thought it should, or it's becoming a concern, generally it's due to estrogen levels that are far too low. We should have plenty of estrogen until we reach about the age of, 50, maybe 49, 50 years old. But I'm seeing women as young as 35 who don't have any discernible estradiol on, their Dutch tests, right? Estriol levels are low, estrone levels are low. And again, that's kind of that picture of depletion. So if you were to show me a Dutch test where estradiol levels were low, progesterone levels were low, and then cortisol levels were low, I'd say this woman's probably not getting her period, or it's probably not very regular. And generally that tends to be true. So for that woman, I would just encourage rest, right? Like stop the overtraining, just get outside and walk, or even better, take a nap in the sun, eat enough food. A woman needs at least 1,800 up to 2,000 calories a day just for baseline. Make sure you're getting about 1 gram of protein per pound of desired body weight. Make sure you're getting enough carbohydrates, at least 150 grams. You have to eat to fuel your body and your period at that point. I love this quote from Dr. Laura Briden, who says, your period is your body's monthly report card, right? And if you're not getting a period, you're getting like an F in period class, right? So how can we work to get you an A in period class? Well, we can eat enough food, get enough outside time, rest enough, and just care for your body well, now that you've been gifted your 40s, right? Your perimenopausal years. The
Mhm.
other thing I like to do with a scanty period or a heavy period is use my cramp-free energy bites. There are a lot of variations of this. It's basically seed cycling, but my ladies really like the cramp-free energy bites because they have lots of chocolate and they're tasty. And so, getting that flaxseed particularly can be helpful on either side if you don't have a heavy period or a heavy enough period, or your period's too heavy, because flax works as a phytoestrogen. So it fits the same cell receptor site as true estradiol does. But if you don't have enough estrogen, it has this weekly estrogenic effect to kind of help build back a normal period. And if you have too much estrogen, it blocks that more toxic estradiol from wreaking havoc on your hormones. So I tell my clients 2 cramp-free energy bites. Every single day, you'll have your chocolate fix, your peanut butter fix, and your period's going to start to regulate itself too.
That sounds nice. And for the women who aren't very familiar with seed cycling, we know there's follicular phase and luteal phase. So if we're talking the first half of your cycle, which are the seeds that they would use in, and then for the second half of the cycle, which seeds?
So for the follicular phase, days 1 through 14 of your cycle, theoretically, you would use flax and pumpkin seeds. The second phase, follicular, so day 15 through 28, you would use sesame seeds or sunflower seeds. What I have seen, I found that a lot of my girls were just getting confused on seed cycling, and it became more of a burden to them than anything else. And so we really did replace seed cycling with just the cramp-free energy bites, and that has really helped a lot of the girls in my practice. I'm not saying it's better than seed cycling. You can absolutely seed cycle if you want, but it just makes things a little bit easier, and it's one less thing you have to think about.
Absolutely. And that's perfect for the clients that we see in our audience, because we are coming from a place of depletion, you can say. And what you mentioned, having low cortisol. Most of the clients that I work with, and even myself, when I first started my healing journey, cortisol was almost tanked to the point where it could have been a diagnosis of like Addison's disease. But I am seeing there's still that slight pattern that prevents that labeling, but very depleted overall. So whatever we can do to minimize having to think, plan, do, and we can prepare things in a nice way, which is another reason I really love your book. I love the recipes that you have at the end. So we'll talk a little bit about those recipes, but let's go back into something with the rest component. You mentioned getting outside. Do you want to talk to us a little bit more about that?
I do. And actually, this is breaking news today on your podcast, Sharon. So I'm actually just signed a contract for my next book. I'm so excited
Yay.
that it is going to be on this topic, just because I've seen such a benefit for my clients who are so depleted, really, as they optimize their circadian rhythm. So that is the top thing I do with my clients. Very first thing, it's free. It's easy. Everyone can do it. If you're 95, if you're, 5 months old, you can get out in the sun. And so that stress management and kind of rest component is something that, we really want to work on if circadian rhythm is off. And basically, if you can't sleep and your period's messed up and you're gaining weight despite eating well and exercising, your circadian rhythm is most likely off, right? If cortisol levels are tanked, your circadian rhythm's probably off. And so the easiest thing I have my clients do is start with 5 minutes of sun outside first thing in the morning. Before you do this and look at your screen first thing in the morning, I just want you to get outside, bonus points if you can go outside and put your bare feet on the grass or in running water, and just allow your brain, your pineal gland, to take in the fact that it's daytime, right? The body sets up now this hormone cascade throughout the rest of the day. It starts to secrete serotonin, which gives you, happiness and joy and makes your day go just a little bit smoother. And then that serotonin, later in the afternoon starts to convert into melatonin to give you a really good sleep cycle. That's your sleepy hormone. So I always tell, my clients a great night's sleep starts first thing in the morning. And it really does. So instead of, checking your email or checking your Facebook or Instagram, just spend 5 minutes outside, no sunglasses, as few clothes as possible. Don't freak out the neighbors. But if you can go outside in a t-shirt and shorts, and no shoes, that's great. And then just repeat that a few times a day. Try to do it around, 10 a.m. Try to do it around 12 p.m., 2 p.m. 5 p.m. Those are naturally times when our energy is going to start to dip and we're going to reach for chips or coffee or sugar or wine. Instead of that, realize your body's actually electrical and you need to get outside and truly recharge your battery. And it's the sun that does that, not wine and cookies.
Exactly. And I do make it a point myself and with my clients to get out there first thing in the morning. But what about those who are waking up before sunrise, like significantly before? Would you recommend that they wait, they hold off for going outside, or do you suggest they do it anyways within half an hour or so?
I love that question. So, none of this is hard and fast. You do the best you can, but generally, I'll also advise my clients to wear blue blocker glasses with amber colored lenses, like blue blockers without like that have, transparent lenses. They're not worth your money, right? Make sure that you get amber colored lenses on your blue
Mhm.
blockers. There's a great brand, I think Spectra 429 on Amazon. They're like $40. So that's a reasonably priced brand. But if you're getting up before the sun, wear your blue blockers in the morning. Be advised that you won't see the entire color spectrum. So make sure you're not like stumbling into anything, in your path, and be safe. But anytime the sun is not up, I would recommend trying to wear your blue blocker. So for an hour, first thing in the morning, an hour or two after the sun goes down at night, put on the blue blockers. It's still going to help protect your circadian rhythm. It's not perfect, but it's a help.
Yeah, and one of the tips that I picked up from your book was kind of setting an alarm for the sunset. I think it was in there that you should be familiar with the time for sunrise and sunset. And that was a part of the day that I was not making sure to get outside, although it sometimes is a lot easier for especially the working class to be out there at that time. So I appreciate that tip for sure.
Oh, I love it. I'm glad you like that. Yeah, because we have to send those correct signals to the pineal gland. When the sun starts to go down, our brain needs to know the sun is going down. Otherwise, it's going to be stuck at 12 o'clock p.m., and our brains are going to think, oh, I should be awake right now. It's going to be harder to get to sleep that night. So getting that twilight exposure to outside time is very helpful for sleep as well.
Yep, yep. So let's jump into the exercise component. And I was guilty of this too. And most of our high achieving women, where you're trying to do all of the basics, like you're doing your work, you're doing your preparation for work, right? You might have a family that you're preparing for. Then after work, you have your home life routine, but you have to squeeze in that workout. And some people do it at 4 in the morning. Some people do it at 9 p.m., which was my case. And I would take an energized drink, which was loaded with caffeine at 9:30 p.m. just to make sure I was doing the workout, thinking, hey, this is the best I can do. I'm making sure to get that physical activity, building muscle, and I thought all was well. But I'm sure that contributed to just the overload my body experienced over time. How would you guide people to understanding what the true, I guess, threshold and the proper balance of exercise is?
Yep, I think many of us were there. That's pretty impressive, though, Sharon, a 9 p.m. workout with an energy drink. I've
All the
not yet
time.
heard that
That was
story.
me every day. Even with a 2-year-old son, I would be
Oh,
doing
mercy.
it.
Oh, that's so great. And I was doing two-a-days after my, kids just because I thought this is the way to quote, get my body back and, lose my baby weight. And of course, it was a stress relief for me too, with 4 little kids to get outside and do, some exercise. But what, you and I, Sharon, didn't realize is that it was completely depleting our hormones, really depleting the gas tank that we had, that's like cortisol and adrenaline. And so, for my women who have that same question, and I do get this a lot because we work a lot with busy professional women, and a lot of moms too, are like, I just don't have time if it's not 4 in the morning. I will tell them perimenopause is your invitation to rest. Like, when is the last time you actually truly rested? I will also kind of give a thought exercise to my clients and ask them, so, how's that 4 a.m. workout working out for you, right? Are you fitting into the jeans you want to fit into? Is your mood fantastic and sparkling? Are you sleeping great every night? And most of them are like, actually, my muscle mass is down and I've put on 10 pounds, even though I'm getting up at 4 a.m. to work out, 5 times a week. So we kind of walk through that thought exercise and eventually they realize, well, maybe this isn't serving me the way I thought it was serving me. I'm doing it just to check it off my list. It's a box I need to check. I'm supposed to exercise if I want to be healthy, and this is the only time I can fit it in. But if you're not, in a body composition, that you enjoy, a weight that you're happy at, and the rest of your biometrics aren't sparkling, then probably it's doing more harm than good. I don't, encourage my clients to stop exercising. I just encourage them, hey, schedule in time during your day, maybe 20 minutes before work, 10 minutes during work, a couple times. Like you have to sneak away to the bathroom. Can you sneak outside for, a couple minutes and just take a little walk? Can you try to get about 10,000 steps a day? Right? It's a great stress management tool. Research shows that 10,000 steps a day is very efficacious for balancing mood and weight, especially if we're doing it outside. And so instead of saying stop going to CrossFit, throw away your Peloton and stop training for marathons, I just kind of encourage my ladies just redirect that energy to a couple strolls throughout the day outside.
Okay, and let's talk about people with slightly limited mobility. So people who've been through multiple surgeries maybe, and again, the clients that I work with, some of them are wheelchair bound, some of them may be bed bound to a certain extent. So are there any ways that you can encourage movement for this particular type of client?
100%. So for people with limited mobility, looking into water therapy, aqua therapy can be very, very helpful. There are places that do specialize in this, where even people with adaptive disabilities can kind of get in and use an apparatus to help them move through the water. But if someone is dealing with hip pain or joint pain, or just doesn't have a lot of energy, getting into a pool inside or outside and just simply walking the length of the pool or gently swimming the length of the pool, this is still functional movement. It's movement that's helpful for our body, but it's not taxing for the body itself. Even just, limited mobility movements on a chair, like swinging kind of from side to side, doing arm circles. These are things if you look at any exercise book from like the 1920s or 1930s, you'll see all these funny body exercises that are drawn out, touching your toes, reaching up high, just trying to keep your body limber and strong to the best of your ability can be very helpful. But I'm a particular fan of aqua therapy. My husband was a collegiate swimmer. He's drilled it into our kids that swimming is the best form of exercise. And so, it really is. It's really great for cross training the body, and it can be adapted to a number of skill sets. And it's something that you can do all throughout life as well.
All right. Love that, Jennifer. I appreciate that look at functional movement versus, hey, do all the cardio or do all the weightlifting.
Yes.
All right. So we can move on to the stress reduction practices. I guess what kind of stressors are you seeing more often with your perimenopausal women?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you kind of have the same stressors in your client population, but a lot of my women will say, I don't feel stressed. And then we look at their life and we see, they're setting their alarm to go off at 4 a.m. They're skipping breakfast. They're drinking coffee on an empty stomach. They're eating a salad with chicken on it for lunch, maybe a total of 300 calories. They're driving back and forth like all day long after working a full day, at the office or in the home. And then they're, trying to put a healthy meal on the table for themselves or their families at night. And since they're so depleted, they're probably drinking a big glass of wine while they're making dinner for everybody. And then since they're a little tipsy and hungry, they dive into the chips in the pantry right after dinner, right? I see that scenario played out so many times. And it really is just the fact that we live in a very stressful fishbowl of an environment, especially as women, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. But honestly, women are being pushed and pushed themselves to do so much more than befits a woman, right? And I'm a working mom of 4 kids. So it's not like I'm immune from this. I love working. I love my job. But women really need to push into that nurturing side of themselves and allow themselves to be feminine, allow themselves to be a receiver and not just a giver, in order to experience true health and to actually reduce stress on the body. And so I tell my women, instead of operating only in your masculine, where you're driving, you're pushing, you're exporting, you're doing, you're, growing and evolving, you also have to push equally into your feminine, where you're receiving, you're soft, you're quiet, you're, more yin, if we're talking about yin and yang. And that particularly, just allowing yourself to kind of sink into your feminine, can be stress relieving, realizing that you don't have to do it all, that the work will get done. You just don't have to push yourself as hard. And what does that look like? It looks like maybe taking one less meeting and giving yourself 30 minutes of like laying out in the sun in the afternoon. You know, maybe it's helping, you know, having a carpool situation set up so you don't have to drive your kids both places every single time. That allows you to, you know, go in for a massage once a month, right? Maybe it is, you know, not taking that promotion at work. Like one of my clients actually did this last week, you know, not taking that promotion at work so she can build in some time in the morning where she eats a full breakfast, has, you know, 20 minutes where she sits outside and reads some inspirational material so she doesn't have to go right into her masculine and, you know, that stressful situation right away. So it is going to look different for most people, but to reduce stress, you just have to pull back a little bit. You can't do everything that you thought you needed to do in your 20s or 30s.
Right.
I'm reading this great book right now. It's called In Praise of Slowness. And I believe it was published in 2006, but it's like, it has a chronology of, you know, humans who've been lamenting literally since 1347 that the world's going too fast and that people are moving too quickly. And so we see it's not a new thing that humans are struggling with, that trying to find balance, that search for balance, but it's going to be ineffective for women's end goals of like trying to just be as productive as possible if you never allow yourself that time to take Epsom salt baths and sit outside in the sun and do some box breathing or breath work and, you know, take some time for self-care, whatever that looks like. Those things are very important to manage our stress.
And it does apply to people who are chronically ill as well. I know that when you're in the pits, when you're in the depths of illness, you're in research mode, you're seeking out, you know, the right medical care team, and you're kind of in a pleading, kind of hopeless state, but you have to learn to pull back even from that and to schedule yourself the time. Like you said, even if you could have someone help you with massage therapy or getting into a bath when you're not mobile enough to do it yourself, like those kinds of things, being on the receiving end. I like how you put that, Jennifer, because we are givers. And even when we are in a chronic illness, we're beating ourselves up for not being able to continue with that giving mechanism.
Yes, yes. And you know, just giving yourself grace and not looking too far forward and not looking too far backward, but really practicing being present and even grateful for where you're at. I, you know, have been in the throes of illness and hormone imbalance. And you bring up a good point that you do feel hopeless. Like the hope has kind of been taken away from you. You know, you just wonder if there's ever going to be an end, if it's going to be different, if you're ever going to feel good again. And so just taking the time to sit in gratitude sounds very counterproductive when you don't feel well and your hope is gone. But that's something I start every single client session with because my clients don't feel good. And so instead of going right into, you know, I didn't sleep last night, I haven't lost any weight yet, we start with, what are 3 things that you're thankful for today? And I take notes every time and I don't allow them to repeat things they're grateful for. You can't just say my cat every single week. Like we have to practice that gratitude. And again, it's hard when you don't feel good, but shifting that mindset, rewiring your limbic system to start practicing being grateful, grounded, and present can be very, very helpful when it comes to shifting your physical body.
And I love that you begin your sessions with that. Like, think of the things to be grateful for. What are the accomplishments, however small they were? And let's start with that.
Yes.
All right. So the last thing that we'll kind of target is targeted therapies. So
Yeah.
if there were specific, let's not say specific, are there any groups of supplements that you find yourself routinely recommending for perimenopausal women?
Yes. Oh, I love this question. Okay. So right now I am drinking my all-time favorite supplement. It is potassium-based electrolytes. Done a ton of work on potassium. I'm kind of obsessed with potassium, but it's really the unsung electrolyte and it can balance out so many things in the body, you know, edema and fatigue and sleep disorders and GI problems. And so I use a particular potassium-based electrolyte powder with my clients. That's very easy. I mean, it's not a recipe. You don't have to make it. You just dump it in your water water and drink it a couple times a day. That's probably the one that I'm using the most with my clients. I really use a lot of magnesium as well, again, for sleep and mood and motility issues. I do like the brand Natural Calm, Natural Vitality magnesium powder, and that's Peter Gillum, I think, makes that. That's a great supplement. So I work a lot with minerals with my clients because, again, I'm working with a very depleted population, hormone and mineral wise. I do a lot of food-based supplements as well. I mentioned my cramp-free energy bites. I also have a recipe called the lemon gut shot that does a lot of, these are all in the book. You've probably seen them. That's really helpful for immunity and, gut dysfunction. And then I have an herbal hormone tonic that's basically just, throwing a bunch of tea bags together, nettle tea and spearmint tea and, chamomile tea. That's a really helpful tonic for women whose nerves are shot and hormones really need some shoring up. And then, of course, the good old adrenal cocktail, not my recipe, very common in the wellness space, but so helpful for women who are stuck in either fight or flight mode or too far into, overly parasympathetic nervous system dominance.
Yes, yes. I love the adrenal cocktail. I do recommend actually the recipe that you have in your book. And for those people who are like going sugar-free, then there's some modifications that are made. And I also love, Jennifer, that you touched on the potassium because a lot of people think electrolytes, and there's a lot of high-name brands that are capitalizing on sodium being the highest concentration. But there are a few out there with potassium and, the right amounts of magnesium. However, we do see that there's still a need for magnesium based on, the functional lab testings that we run. So I do appreciate that potassium insight. And I just was looking at the book again for that adrenal cocktail. There's a lot of recipes in here, and they're very easy to make, very doable, so people can take a look. And it's pretty substantial for all the things you can make in terms of dietary modifications that are very much needed for this time period of life.
Thank you, Sharon. That means a lot to me. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, Jennifer, I want the audience to know where they can find you or where they can learn more about you and even pick up your book.
Fantastic. Yes. So my website's jenniferwoodwardnutrition.com. Most of that stuff you can find off my website. On Instagram, I'm Jennifer Woodward Wellness. I'm probably the most active there. And if you just go to Amazon or Google and you type in Easy Perimenopause, the essential guide to modern midlife, my book will come up. I hope you get a chance to read it. I just tried to write it, so everyone can benefit from this information because not everyone can work with a functional practitioner. Not everyone has the time or the finances. And so, for $7 on Kindle, you have access to all this information that really, will help you through this perimenopausal time in life.
And all of the great steps in terms of your diet, your rest, your exercise, and your stress reduction. Everything is in there, like I said, in a distilled, succinct way. So very easy and practical ways to implement there.
Thank you, Sharon.
All right, Jennifer, again, thank you so much for joining us here. We appreciate it. And we'll make sure to have everything in our show notes for our audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks for being here, you guys.
All right, thank you, everyone. Take care.